The first gunshot rang out just as the stagecoach lurched forward, sending Virginia Evans sprawling onto the dusty floor. It was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as the men who sought to conquer it. The second shot splintered the wooden panel inches from her head, and the driver's panicked shout confirmed what she already knew: this was no ordinary holdup. "Get down, miss," the driver yelled as more bullets peppered the coach. Virginia pressed herself against the floorboards, her heart hammering against her ribs. Just 3 days ago, she had been safely tucked away in her father's Boston home, preparing for another tedious social season. Now she was caught in a stagecoach robbery, miles from civilization, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her life savings sewn into the hem of her dress. The stagecoach came to an abrupt halt, throwing her forward again. Through the small window, she caught sight of 3 masked men on horseback, their revolvers trained on the driver. "Out! Everyone out!" one of the men shouted, his voice muffled by the bandana covering the lower half of his face. Virginia's traveling companions, an elderly couple, and a salesman shakily exited the coach. She followed, stepping carefully onto the hard-packed dirt of the trail. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat already beaded on her forehead despite the relatively cool spring morning. "Valuables in the bag," ordered the tallest robber, tossing a burlap sack at the feet of the passengers. "Money, jewelry, watches, all of it." The elderly woman sobbed quietly as her husband removed a gold pocket watch from his vest. The salesman emptied his wallet without protest. When the sack reached Virginia, she hesitated, her fingers instinctively moving to the hem of her dress where her entire inheritance was hidden. I have nothing of value," she stammered. The tall robber dismounted, his spurs jangling ominously as he approached. He towered over her, and she could smell tobacco and whiskey on his breath as he leaned in close. "Search her," he ordered one of his companions. Rough hands grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. Virginia's chest tightened with fear as she felt fingers prodding at her dress, searching for hidden pockets or valuables. "Boss, look what I found." The man had discovered the slightly thicker hem of her dress and now produced a small knife to cut it open. Virginia lunged forward, desperate to stop him. "No, please." A hard slap across her face sent her reeling backward. She tasted blood as her lips split. "Too slow, girl," sneered the robber as he ripped open the hem, revealing the carefully hidden bank notes, her entire future. "Should have handed it over when asked." Another blow caught her across the shoulders, driving her to her knees. "Stupid girl. Too slow to listen, too slow to obey." The beating might have continued if not for the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The robbers' heads snapped up simultaneously, and Virginia, through the haze of pain and tears, saw a lone rider approaching from the east. "Trouble," muttered one of the bandits, hastily stuffing Virginia's money into his pocket. The tall leader grabbed Virginia's hair, yanking her head back. "Next time a man asks you for something, girl, you'd best not be so slow." He shoved her to the ground as the 3 robbers mounted their horses, preparing to flee, but the approaching rider was closing fast. "That's Archer," hissed one of the robbers, recognition and fear evident in his voice. Without another word, they spurred their horses and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and their terrified victims behind. Virginia pushed herself to her knees, wiping blood from her lip as she watched the lone rider approach. He rode with easy confidence, one hand on the reins, the other resting near the holster at his hip. As he drew closer, she could make out more details: tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He reined his horse to a stop near the stagecoach and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Everyone all right?" The driver nodded shakily. They got our valuables, Mr. Archer, but nobody's hurt bad. The stranger Archer turned his attention to Virginia, still kneeling in the dirt. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and crouched beside her, his blue eyes assessing her injuries with a practiced gaze. "They roughed you up," he said, his voice deep but gentle. He offered his hand. "Can you stand, miss?" Virginia took his outstretched hand, noticing the calluses that spoke of hard work and a harder life. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas Archer," he supplied, steadying her as she rose to her feet. "Most folks just call me Tucker." "Virginia Evans," she replied, wincing as her split lip stung with the movement. Tucker reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. "For your lip." She accepted it gratefully, pressing the soft cloth against her mouth. "They took everything I had," she said, her voice breaking. "My father's inheritance. I was coming west to start a new life, and now—" Tucker's expression hardened. "The Denton gang. They've been troubling these parts for months now." He glanced in the direction the robbers had fled. "Which way were you headed?" "Promise Creek," Virginia answered. "I have an arrangement to teach at the schoolhouse there." Tucker nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "That's where I'm headed. Town's still about 30 miles west." He turned to the stagecoach driver. "Will you make it to the station with your passengers?" The driver nodded. "We'll manage, Mr. Archer, but the lady here—" He looked uncertainly at Virginia. Tucker turned back to her. "Miss Evans, I'd be happy to escort you to Promise Creek. It's not safe for you to continue alone, especially after crossing paths with the Dentons." Virginia hesitated, eyeing the stranger. He was undeniably handsome, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jawline softened only slightly by a neatly trimmed beard. But she had been raised to be cautious around men, particularly those carrying firearms as comfortably as this one did. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Archer, but I hardly know you." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough. Sheriff Mason in Promise Creek can vouch for me. I do some scouting work for him from time to time." He gestured to the stagecoach. "But if you'd prefer to take your chances with the regular transport—" The elderly woman who had been watching the exchange stepped forward. "Dear, you should go with Mr. Archer. My husband and I have traveled these routes before, and I assure you, there's no safer escort in the territory. He once recovered our grandson's stolen horse from those awful Clayton brothers." Tucker tipped his hat to the woman. "Much obliged for the recommendation, Mrs. Thornton." Virginia looked from the battered stagecoach to Tucker's steady gaze and made her decision. "Very well, Mr. Archer. I accept your offer." Within minutes, Tucker had secured her small traveling case to his horse. He mounted first, then reached down to help Virginia up behind him. She settled awkwardly, unsure where to place her hands. "You'll want to hold on," Tucker advised. "Storm here has a smoother gait than most, but 30 miles is a fair distance." Hesitantly, Virginia placed her hands on his sides, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. As they set off, the motion of the horse forced her to grip tighter, her arms eventually circling his waist. "I've lost everything," she said after they had been riding in silence for some time. "I don't know what I'll do when we reach Promise Creek." Tucker was quiet for a moment before responding. "People out here understand hard times, Miss Evans. Promise Creek is a small town, but they look after their own, and they've been waiting on a schoolteacher for nearly a year. But I have nothing to offer now, no money for lodging, for supplies." The town council set aside a small house for the teacher. "It's not much, but it's yours with the position. As for the rest, we'll figure something out." Virginia rested her forehead against his back, suddenly exhausted. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Archer?" He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice carried a note of something she couldn't quite identify. Let's just say I recognize someone who's been dealt a bad hand." They rode through the afternoon, stopping occasionally to rest the horse and drink from Tucker's canteen. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Virginia found herself growing increasingly comfortable with the proximity to her rescuer. There was something solid and reassuring about Tucker Archer, a steadiness that seemed rare in a world that had just turned upside down for her. "How much farther?" she asked as they crested a small rise. "We should reach town by nightfall," Tucker replied. "How's your lip?" Virginia touched her face gingerly. "Better, thank you," he nodded, adjusting his hat against the glare of the setting sun. "The schoolhouse is on the east end of town. Your quarters are attached to the back. It's simple, but it should serve until you get settled." "And the children? When am I expected to begin teaching?" "Town's got about 20 children of school age. They've been without proper schooling since old Mrs. Gillespie passed last summer. They're eager, I imagine, but they'll give you time to get your bearings." As they rode, Tucker pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. He knew the territory intimately. Every creek, ridge, and valley seemed to hold some significance for him. Virginia found herself hanging on his words, picturing the events he described and the people who had shaped this rugged land. "And that ridge there," he said, indicating a rocky outcropping to the north, "that's where the Butterfield stage was held up in '69. 3 men died." Virginia shivered despite the warmth of the evening. "It seems a dangerous place." Tucker glanced over his shoulder at her. "It can be. But there's beauty in it too, and freedom. People come west for all sorts of reasons, but most are looking for a fresh start." "Like me," Virginia murmured. "Like you," he agreed. The sun was just touching the horizon when Promise Creek came into view. It was smaller than Virginia had imagined, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. Lamplight glowed in windows, and a few figures moved along the boardwalks that fronted the establishments. "It's not much," Tucker said, almost apologetically. "But it's home to good people." As they rode down the main street, Virginia noticed curious glances from the townspeople. A few called out greetings to Tucker, who responded with a wave or a tip of his hat. They stopped in front of a small building with a freshly painted sign that read "Sheriff's Office." Tucker dismounted and helped Virginia down, her legs unsteady after the long ride. "Let's get you introduced to Sheriff Mason. He'll want to hear about your run-in with the Denton gang." The sheriff's office was simply furnished: a desk, a few chairs, and a row of cells visible through a doorway at the back. Sheriff Mason himself was a portly man with a thick mustache and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Tucker Archer," he said warmly, rising from his desk. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." His gaze shifted to Virginia, taking in her travel-worn appearance and injured lip. "And who might this be?" "This is Miss Virginia Evans," Tucker explained. "She's the new schoolteacher. Had some trouble with the Denton gang on her way, and they robbed the eastbound stage about 30 miles out." Sheriff Mason's expression darkened. "Those boys are pushing their luck. You hurt, miss?" Virginia shook her head. "Nothing serious, Sheriff. But they took everything I had, my father's inheritance. I was bringing it to start my new life here." "How much did they get?" Mason asked, reaching for a pencil and paper. "Just over $2,000, Virginia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Both men's eyebrows rose at the sum. Tucker let out a low whistle. "That's a mighty large amount to be carrying, Miss Evans. It was all I had in the world," she explained. "My father passed recently, and the bank was foreclosing on our Boston home. I sold everything and took this position out west. I thought I could build something new here." Sheriff Mason sighed. "I'm sorry for your troubles, miss. I'll send telegrams to the surrounding towns, but truth be told, that money's likely long gone. The Dentons aren't known for keeping their ill-gotten gains for long." Virginia nodded, having expected as much. "I understand." Tucker stepped forward. "Sheriff, Miss Evans needs to get settled at the schoolhouse. I'll take her there now if you're done with your questions." Mason nodded. "Of course. Miss Evans, welcome to Promise Creek. I wish your arrival had been under better circumstances, but please know you're welcome here. The town's been looking forward to having a proper teacher again." Virginia managed a small smile. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll do my best not to disappoint." Outside, Tucker untied his horse and led the way down the street toward the eastern edge of town. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure, larger than many of the buildings they had passed, with a small bell tower atop the roof. Behind it stood a modest cabin, her new home. Tucker opened the door and lit a lamp that stood on a small table just inside. The interior was spare but clean, a small sitting area with a wood stove, a kitchen space with shelves and a pump sink, and a door that presumably led to a bedroom. "It's not much," Tucker said, echoing his earlier assessment of the town. Virginia stepped inside, running her hand along the back of a simple wooden chair. "It's more than I expected." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "Thank you, Mr. Archer, for everything." He shifted uncomfortably, his tall frame seeming too large for the small cabin. "I should leave you to get settled. There's firewood stacked outside, and I believe Mrs. Peterson from the general store stocked some basic provisions for your arrival." Virginia nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The events of the day, the robbery, the beating, the long ride, all crashed down upon her at once. Tucker must have noticed, for his expression softened. "Get some rest, Miss Evans. Things will look brighter in the morning." As he turned to leave, Virginia called after him. "Will I see you again, Mr. Archer?" He paused in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the darkening sky. "Promise Creek is a small town, Miss Evans. I reckon our paths will cross again soon enough." With that, he was gone, the soft jingle of his spurs fading into the night. Virginia woke the next morning to the sound of voices outside her window. Disoriented, she sat up in the unfamiliar bed, wincing as her body protested the movement. The beating she had endured had left bruises that were now making themselves known in earnest. Pulling on her dress, the only one she had left, she moved to the window and peered out. A small group of women stood in front of the schoolhouse, their heads bent together in conversation. As Virginia watched, one of them approached the cabin and knocked firmly on the door. Hastily pinning up her hair, Virginia went to answer it. The woman on her doorstep was perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and kind eyes that assessed Virginia with open curiosity. "Good morning," the woman said briskly. "I'm Martha Peterson. I run the general store with my husband. We heard about your troubles from Sheriff Mason this morning." "Virginia Evans," Virginia replied, offering her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson." Martha clasped her hand warmly. "The pleasure is mine, dear. We've been waiting for a proper teacher since poor Mrs. Gillespie passed." Her gaze traveled over Virginia's appearance, noting the bruised lip and the wrinkled dress. "Sheriff Mason told us about the robbery. Terrible business." Before Virginia could respond, Martha continued, "The ladies and I have put together a few things to help you get started." She gestured to the women behind her, who now approached bearing parcels and baskets. "This is Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Whitley, and Mrs. Cooper," Martha introduced. "They all have children who will be in your class." The women greeted Virginia warmly, pressing their offerings into her hands, a basket of fresh bread and preserves, a package containing fabric and sewing supplies, A small box of teaching materials salvaged from Mrs. Gillespie's belongings. "I don't know what to say," Virginia stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. "Say nothing," Mrs. Henderson insisted. "We take care of our own in Promise Creek, and as of yesterday that includes you." The women helped Virginia settle into her new home, showing her how to work the temperamental stove and pointing out where Mrs. Gillespie had kept various supplies. By midday, Virginia had a much clearer understanding of her new life and responsibilities in Promise Creek. "School typically runs from 8 until 3, Mrs. Whitley explained as they sat around Virginia's small table, sharing tea. "The children range from 6 to 16, though the older boys often miss during planting and harvest seasons." "And what of the curriculum?" Virginia asked. "I brought some of my teaching materials, but they were in my trunk on the stagecoach." "Mrs. Gillespie left her books," Mrs. Cooper said. "They're old but serviceable. And Tucker Archer brought some newer texts from Tucson last fall, hoping we'd find a teacher soon." Virginia's heart quickened at the mention of Tucker. "Mr. Archer seems very invested in the town's welfare." The women exchanged glances that Virginia couldn't quite interpret. "Tucker keeps to himself mostly," Martha said carefully. "Has a ranch about 5 miles north of town. But he's always been generous with his time and resources when the town needs help." "He's a fine man," Mrs. Henderson added, "though he's had his share of troubles." Virginia wanted to ask more, but something in the women's manner suggested that Tucker Archer's past was not a topic for casual conversation. Instead, she steered the discussion back to the practicalities of her new position. By late afternoon, the women had departed, leaving Virginia alone with her thoughts and a much improved living situation. They had promised to spread word that school would begin the following Monday, giving Virginia a few days to prepare. She was arranging the books they had brought her when another knock came at her door. Expecting one of the women returning with some forgotten item, Virginia was surprised to find Tucker Archer standing on her doorstep, hat in hand. "Mr. Archer," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "This is a surprise." He shifted his weight, seemingly uncomfortable. "Miss Evans, I trust you're settling in." "Yes, thanks to the kindness of the townswomen. They've been most generous." Tucker nodded. "Good people in Promise Creek." He hesitated, then held out a small leather pouch. "I brought you something." Curious, Virginia accepted the pouch. It was heavier than she expected. Opening it, she gasped at the sight of gold coins gleaming in the afternoon light. "Mr. Archer, I can't possibly. It's not charity," he interrupted. "Consider it an advance on your salary. The town council approved it this morning when they heard about your situation." Virginia looked up at him, unconvinced. The entire town council happened to meet this morning. A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe I called the meeting, and maybe this is your personal money, not the town's," she guessed. Tucker didn't confirm or deny her suspicion. "Does it matter? You need funds to get started, clothes, supplies for the school." Virginia wanted to refuse to maintain her independence despite her dire circumstances, but practicality won out. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll repay every cent." "No rush," Tucker said, relaxing slightly now that she had accepted the money. "Teaching pays decently here, but it'll take time." An awkward silence fell between them. Virginia was acutely aware of her rumpled appearance and the modest cabin behind her. Tucker seemed equally uncomfortable, his large frame tense as he stood before her. "Would you like to come in?" Virginia offered, surprising herself with the invitation. Tucker hesitated, then shook his head. "Best not. Town's small and people talk." "Of course," Virginia replied, embarrassed at her own impropriety. "I wasn't thinking." "No offense taken," Tucker assured her. I actually came to invite you to dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening. The town council would like to meet you properly, and it would give you a chance to ask any questions about your position." Virginia smiled, relieved. "I'd be delighted. 6 o'clock, then. I can escort you if you'd like." "That would be lovely, thank you." Tucker settled his hat back on his head and tipped it slightly. "Until tomorrow, Miss Evans." Virginia watched him walk away, noting the easy confidence in his stride and the way other townspeople greeted him as he passed. There was something compelling about Tucker Archer, something beyond his handsome features and obvious kindness. A mystery she found herself increasingly eager to unravel. The following day passed in a flurry of activity as Virginia prepared for her new role. She spent the morning exploring the schoolhouse, familiarizing herself with its layout and resources. The afternoon was devoted to a visit to Martha Peterson's general store, where she used a small portion of Tucker's loan to purchase fabric for a new dress and some basic necessities. Martha helped her select appropriate materials, offering advice on what was practical for the climate and her position. "Nothing too fancy," she cautioned. "The children can be hard on nice things, and the parents wouldn't take kindly to a teacher who puts on airs." By 5:30, Virginia had managed to fashion a simple but presentable dress from the blue cotton fabric. It wasn't her finest work, she'd had to rush the stitching in places, but it was clean and new, and she felt more herself in it than she had since the robbery. Tucker arrived precisely at 6, knocking politely on her door. When she opened it, she was struck anew by his imposing presence. He had cleaned up for the occasion, his usual trail dust absent, his dark hair neatly combed beneath his hat. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest with a string tie at his throat. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "Miss Evans, you look recovered." Virginia smiled, touching her lip where the cut was beginning to heal. "Amazing what a good night's sleep and a new dress can accomplish." "Blue suits you," he said, then seemed embarrassed by the personal observation. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The Promise Creek Hotel was the tallest building in town, a 2-story structure with a wide porch spanning its front. The restaurant occupied the ground floor, and as Tucker escorted Virginia inside, she saw that it was nearly full. Conversations quieted briefly as heads turned to observe their entrance. Sheriff Mason waved them over to a large table where several men and their wives were already seated. Virginia recognized Mrs. Peterson sitting beside a tall, thin man who must be her husband. "Miss Evans," Sheriff Mason said, rising to greet them. "Welcome. Please join us." Tucker held her chair, and Virginia was seated between him and Mrs. Peterson. The sheriff introduced the others around the table: Mr. Peterson from the general store, Mr. Harrison the banker, Mr. Cooper the blacksmith, and Judge Harlow, who served as the head of the town council. "We're mighty pleased to have you in Promise Creek, Miss Evans," Judge Harlow said once the introductions were complete. "Been needing a teacher something fierce." "I'm honored to be here," Virginia replied, "and grateful for the warm welcome I've received, especially considering the circumstances of my arrival." "Terrible business with the Denton gang," Mr. Harrison said, shaking his head. "They've been a plague on this territory for too long." "Speaking of," Sheriff Mason interjected, "I received a telegram from Sheriff Collins in Tucson today. Seems the Dentons were spotted there yesterday, spending freely. Collins is organizing a posse." Virginia's heart leaped with hope. "Is there a chance they might recover my money?" The men exchanged glances, and it was Tucker who answered gently. "Miss Evans, even if they catch the Dentons, that money's likely long gone. Men like that burn through stolen cash quickly." The disappointment must have shown on her face, for Mrs. Peterson patted her hand sympathetically. "Never mind, dear. You'll make your way here just fine without it." The conversation turned to more pleasant topics as dinner was served. Virginia found herself drawn into discussions about the town, its history, and the expectations for the school. Judge Harlow explained that her salary would be $40 per month, with room and board provided, and that the school term would run through June, with a break for the summer months. "Of course, many of the children will need extra help," Mrs. Cooper added. "Some haven't had proper schooling in nearly a year." "I'll do my best," Virginia promised. "I was fortunate to receive excellent training at the Boston Teachers College." "Boston," Mr. Harrison repeated, impressed. "What brings a Boston-educated lady all the way to Arizona Territory?" Virginia hesitated, uncertain how much of her personal circumstances to share. "My father passed recently," she said finally. "There was little left for me in Boston, and I've always harbored a desire to see more of our country." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Her father's death had indeed precipitated her journey west, though the financial ruin that followed, caused by his gambling debts, was something she preferred to keep private. "Well, their loss is our gain," Judge Harlow declared. "To Miss Evans and the future of education in Promise Creek." The others raised their glasses in toast, and Virginia felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time since the robbery, she felt that perhaps everything would work out after all. Throughout the meal, she was aware of Tucker beside her, his quiet presence, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as he reached for the salt, the deep rumble of his voice when he joined the conversation. He spoke little, but when he did, the others listened with respect. As the evening wound down, Virginia found herself stifling yawns. The events of the past few days had left her more exhausted than she cared to admit. Tucker noticed immediately. "It's been a long day for Miss Evans," he said, rising from his seat. "If you'll excuse us, I believe I should see her home." The others nodded their understanding, bidding Virginia good night with promises to send their children to school on Monday morning. Tucker offered his arm once more, and they stepped out into the cool night air. "Thank you for arranging this evening," Virginia said as they walked slowly toward her cabin. "It was most informative." "They're good people," Tucker replied. "They'll support you." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Virginia gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since their first meeting. "Mr. Archer, may I ask what brings you to Promise Creek? The ladies mentioned you have a ranch nearby, but—" Tucker was quiet for so long that Virginia feared she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if choosing his words carefully. "I came west after the war, needed space to clear my head, found work as a scout for the Army, then as a ranger tracking outlaws." He paused. "About 5 years ago, I tracked a particularly nasty gang to this area. In the process, I helped some of the local ranchers recover stolen cattle. They offered me land as payment, good land with water rights. Decided to stay." It was more than he had said at one time since they'd met, but Virginia sensed there were significant gaps in the story. Still, she didn't press. "And now you're a rancher," Tucker nodded. "Cattle mostly, some horses. You enjoy it, ranching?" A small smile touched his lips. "It has its moments. I prefer it to shooting at people or having them shoot at me." They had reached her cabin, and Virginia turned to face him. "Thank you again, Mr. Archer, for everything you've done since we met." Tucker shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Virginia said firmly, "not anyone. What you did, what you're still doing, it's extraordinary kindness to a stranger." He looked away, his profile sharp against the starlit sky. "Get some rest, Miss Evans. Monday will be here before you know it." As he turned to leave, Virginia called after him. Mr. Archer, he paused, looking back at her. I hope we might be friends. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. I'd like that, Miss Evans. Virginia watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually swallowed by the darkness. There was so much more she wanted to know about Thomas Archer, so many questions left unasked. But there would be time, she told herself. Promise Creek was a small town after all. Monday arrived with clear skies and a fluttering of nervous excitement in Virginia's stomach. She had spent Sunday preparing the schoolhouse, cleaning the chalkboards, arranging desks, and organizing the books and materials that had been provided. Now, standing at the schoolhouse door as the children began to arrive, she felt both trepidation and anticipation. They came in twos and threes, some accompanied by parents, others arriving on their own. The younger ones eyed her curiously, while the older children maintained a studied indifference that Virginia recognized as self-protection against the unknown. By 8 o'clock, 19 children ranging from 6 to 16 were seated at the desks. Virginia took a deep breath and rang the small hand bell that signaled the start of class. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Miss Evans, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher." The children murmured greetings, some enthusiastic, others barely audible. "I thought we might begin by introducing ourselves," Virginia continued. "I'd like to know your names and perhaps one thing you enjoy doing when you're not in school." She started with the youngest children in the front row and worked her way back. There were the Peterson twins, Emily and Elijah, both 8, Sarah Cooper, the blacksmith's 10-year-old daughter, William Harrison, the banker's serious 12-year-old son, and a dozen others whose names and faces Virginia committed carefully to memory. The oldest student was Nathan Whitley, a lanky 16-year-old who seemed uncomfortable confined to a desk. "I help my pa with the horses," he said when his turn came. "Don't really have time for much else." Virginia nodded understandingly. "Well, I appreciate that you're here, Nathan. Education is important, even for future horse trainers." A hint of a smile touched the boy's face, and Virginia counted it as a small victory. The morning passed quickly as Virginia assessed the children's knowledge and abilities. As she had expected, there were significant gaps in their education due to the long absence of a teacher. Some of the older children had continued their studies independently, while others had clearly not opened a book in months. By lunchtime, Virginia had developed a tentative plan to address the varying needs of her students. She dismissed them for the midday break, watching as they scattered to eat the lunches they had brought from home. She was just unwrapping her own simple meal when she heard a horse approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Tucker Archer riding toward the schoolhouse. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then removed his hat as he approached her. "Mr. Archer," she greeted him, "this is an unexpected pleasure." Tucker nodded, glancing toward the children playing in the schoolyard. "Thought I'd see how your first day was going." "It's going well, thank you." The children seem eager to learn, though there's quite a range of abilities to address. Tucker's gaze returned to her. "You'll manage it." "You strike me as a capable woman, Miss Evans." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you. Would you care to join me for lunch? It's simple fare, but there's plenty." He hesitated, then nodded. "Much obliged." They sat together on the schoolhouse steps, sharing bread, cheese, and apples in companionable silence. The children watched them curiously, and Virginia noticed several of them whispering among themselves. "I think we're causing a stir," she murmured to Tucker. He followed her gaze to the children. "Small town, they don't get much excitement. Is a new schoolteacher having lunch with a rancher considered excitement in Promise Creek?" A smile touched Tucker's lips. "More than you might think." Virginia laughed softly. Well, I'm glad to provide entertainment. They finished their meal and Tucker rose to leave. I should let you get back to your teaching. Thank you for stopping by, Virginia said, suddenly reluctant to see him go. It was a welcome distraction. Tucker settled his hat back on his head. I was thinking, there's to be a social at the church this Saturday evening. Might be a good opportunity for you to meet more of the townspeople. Virginia brightened at the suggestion. That sounds lovely. I could escort you if you'd like. I'd like that very much, Mr. Archer. He nodded, seeming pleased. Saturday, then. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, she confirmed. As Tucker rode away, Virginia noticed the curious stares of her students. She clapped her hands briskly. Time to resume our lessons, children. Let's see how much mathematics you remember. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lessons, questions, and the gradual easing of tension as Virginia and her students became more comfortable with one another. By the time she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, she felt cautiously optimistic about her new position. Several parents arrived to collect the younger children, and Virginia took the opportunity to introduce herself and discuss their children's progress. Mrs. Peterson lingered after the others had gone. "How was your first day, dear?" she asked kindly. "Challenging but rewarding," Virginia replied honestly. "The children are bright, though some will need extra attention to catch up." Mrs. Peterson nodded. "They're good kids, mostly. Just need a firm hand and some patience." She paused, her expression turning curious. "I saw Tucker Archer here at lunchtime." Virginia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Yes, he stopped by to see how things were going." "Did he now?" Mrs. Peterson's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a knowing look. "Tucker doesn't usually take such an interest in town affairs." "He's been very kind to me since my arrival," Virginia said. "I'm grateful for his support." Mrs. Peterson patted her arm. "He's a good man, Tucker is, just careful with his affections." She hesitated, then added, "He's had his share of heartache," before Virginia could ask what she meant. Mrs. Peterson changed the subject. "Will you be attending the social on Saturday?" "Yes, actually. Mr. Archer has offered to escort me." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Has he indeed?" "Well, that should set tongues wagging," Virginia frowned. "Is there something improper in his offer?" "Not at all, dear. It's just that Tucker generally avoids such gatherings. He must think highly of you to make an exception." With that cryptic remark, Mrs. Peterson took her leave, leaving Virginia to wonder about the enigma that was Tucker Archer, and why the prospect of attending a church social with him should cause such interest among the townspeople. The week passed quickly as Virginia settled into her new routine. Each day brought fresh challenges and small victories in the classroom. The children were responding well to her teaching methods, and several parents had stopped by to express their appreciation for her efforts. Tucker didn't return to the schoolhouse, but Virginia found herself thinking of him, often wondering what he was doing at his ranch, remembering the warmth of his presence beside her at dinner, anticipating their meeting on Saturday. By Friday afternoon, the excitement among the children was palpable as they discussed the upcoming social. Virginia gathered that it was a monthly event, eagerly anticipated by the entire community. "There'll be music and dancing," Emily Peterson informed her enthusiastically. "And Mrs. Henderson makes the best apple pie in the territory." "It sounds wonderful," Virginia replied, smiling at the child's excitement. "Are you coming, Miss Evans?" asked Sarah Cooper. "Yes, I am." "Are you coming with anyone?" Sarah persisted, her young face alight with curiosity. Virginia hesitated, aware that her answer would likely be repeated throughout the town before sundown. "Mr. Archer has kindly offered to escort me." A ripple of whispers spread through the classroom. Nathan Whitley, usually so reserved, actually looked up from his book with interest. "Mr. "Archer never comes to socials," he said, his tone suggesting that Virginia had accomplished something remarkable. "Well, perhaps he's decided it's time to be more sociable," Virginia replied lightly, trying to downplay the significance. "Now, let's return to our geography lesson. Who can tell me the capital of Colorado Territory?" Saturday evening arrived with Virginia feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She had spent the morning washing her hair and pressing her blue dress to remove the wrinkles. It was still her only good dress, but she had added a white lace collar that Mrs. Peterson had generously given her, which transformed it into something more suitable for a social occasion. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock came at her door. Virginia took a deep breath, smoothed her hair one final time, and went to answer it. Tucker stood on her doorstep, hat in hand. He was dressed much as he had been for the dinner at the hotel, but with the addition of a dark jacket that accentuated his broad shoulders. His hair was neatly combed and he had trimmed his beard. The overall effect was striking. "Miss Evans," he greeted her, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Archer. You're quite handsome yourself." A faint flush colored his cheeks at the compliment. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and Virginia took it, feeling a small thrill at the contact. They walked together toward the church, which stood near the center of town. Already, the sound of fiddle music drifted through the evening air, and lamplight spilled from the church windows. "I should warn you," Tucker said as they approached. "There will be considerable interest in our arrival." Virginia squeezed his arm reassuringly. "I've gathered as much from the children's reactions when I mentioned you were escorting me. Should I be concerned?" Tucker shook his head. "Just prepared. I don't typically attend these gatherings." "May I ask why?" He was silent for a moment before answering. "I'm not much for crowds. Or dancing, or small talk." "Then why did you offer to bring me tonight?" Virginia asked, genuinely curious. Tucker glanced down at her, his expression softening. "Because I thought you might enjoy it, and because—" He hesitated. "Because I find I enjoy your company, Miss Evans." The simple admission warmed Virginia more than she would have expected. "I enjoy yours as well, Mr. Archer." They had reached the church steps, and Tucker paused. "Ready?" Virginia nodded, and they entered the church together. As Tucker had predicted, their arrival caused a momentary lull in conversation as heads turned to observe them. Then, as if by mutual agreement, the townspeople resumed their activities, though Virginia noticed several speculative glances in their direction. The church's main room had been transformed for the occasion. The pews had been pushed to the walls, creating an open space in the center for dancing. Tables laden with food and drink lined one wall, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. Sheriff Mason approached them first, a broad smile on his face. "Miss Evans, Tucker, glad you could make it." "Sheriff," Tucker acknowledged with a nod. "Tucker Archer at a social," the sheriff marveled, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." Virginia felt Tucker tense slightly beside her and sought to ease the moment. "I understand from my students that Mrs. Henderson's apple pie is not to be missed, Sheriff. Is that true?" Mason laughed. "Absolutely true, Miss Evans. You should try it before it's all gone." Taking Tucker's arm, Virginia steered him toward the refreshment tables. "Your attendance seems to be causing quite a stir," she murmured. "Told you it would," he replied, but his posture had relaxed somewhat. They were quickly drawn into conversation with various townspeople, many of whom Virginia recognized as parents of her students. Everyone was welcoming, though she noticed the curious glances that passed between them when they thought she wasn't looking. Mrs. Peterson materialized at Virginia's side as Tucker was engaged in conversation with Mr. Cooper about a horse the blacksmith was shoeing for him. You've accomplished what no one else has managed in 5 years, Mrs. Peterson said in a low voice, nodding toward Tucker. Getting that man to attend a social function voluntarily. Virginia followed her gaze. Tucker was listening intently to Mr. Cooper, his expression serious but engaged. He said he doesn't care for crowds, or much of anything that involves other people, Mrs. Peterson agreed. Not since Sarah. Virginia's curiosity was piqued. Sarah, Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened as she realized she had said too much. Oh dear, that's not my story to tell, I shouldn't have mentioned it. Before Virginia could press for more information, the music changed to a lively reel, and couples began moving to the center of the room for dancing. Mr. Peterson appeared, claiming his wife for the dance. If you'll excuse us, Miss Evans. Left alone, Virginia watched the dancers, tapping her foot in time to the music. She was so absorbed in the spectacle that she didn't notice Tucker's return until he spoke. Would you care to dance, Miss Evans? She turned to him in surprise. I thought you didn't dance, Mr. Archer. A small smile touched his lips. I said I wasn't much for dancing, not that I couldn't if properly motivated. Virginia placed her hand in his outstretched one. In that case, I'd be delighted. Tucker led her to the dance floor where they joined the other couples. The dance was a simple one, requiring partners to circle each other, join hands and promenade around the floor. Virginia was pleased to discover that Tucker moved with unexpected grace for such a large man, his steps sure and his hands steady at her waist. You dance very well for someone who professes to dislike it, she observed as they circled each other. My mother insisted on lessons, he replied. Said no son of hers would grow up to be a clumsy oaf, regardless of our circumstances. It was the first time he had mentioned his family, and Virginia seized the opportunity to learn more about him. Where did you grow up, Mr. Archer? Kentucky. Small town not unlike this one, though with more trees and less dust. Do you miss it? A shadow crossed his face. Sometimes. But there was nothing left for me there after the war. They were separated by the movements of the dance before Virginia could inquire further. When they came together again, Tucker skillfully turned the conversation. And you, Miss Evans, do you miss Boston? Virginia considered the question. I miss certain aspects of it, the libraries, the theaters, the changing of the seasons, but it held painful memories at the end. Because of your father's passing, partly, she admitted, and partly because of what came after, my father. He was not as financially prudent as I believed. There were debts. Understanding dawned in Tucker's eyes. That's why you were bringing your inheritance west. It was all you had left. Virginia nodded, surprised at how easy it was to confide in him. The irony is that I had planned to use part of it to establish a small school of my own eventually. Now, I find myself teaching in someone else's school with nothing to my name. Sometimes life has a way of bringing us where we need to be, even if the path isn't what we would have chosen, Tucker said thoughtfully. The dance ended, and couples around them applauded the musicians. Tucker led Virginia back to the edge of the room where they found Sheriff Mason waiting for them. Sorry to interrupt your evening, he said, his expression grave. Tucker, could I have a word? Tucker frowned but nodded. Excuse me, Miss Evans. Virginia watched as the two men moved to a quieter corner of the room, their heads bent in serious conversation. Whatever the sheriff was saying, it was causing Tucker's expression to harden, his jaw set in a grim line. Mrs. Henderson approached, offering Virginia a slice of the famous apple pie. You've caused quite a sensation, my dear. Virginia accepted the pie gratefully. So I've gathered, though I don't understand why Mr. Archer's attendance at a social should cause such interest. Mrs. Henderson glanced toward where Tucker and the sheriff were still deep in conversation. Tucker Archer is a man who keeps to himself, Has done ever since he came to Promise Creek. Oh, he's always been willing to help when needed, tracking rustlers, finding lost children, bringing supplies during the flood 2 years back. But he doesn't socialize, doesn't let people get close. Mrs. Peterson mentioned someone named Sarah, Virginia said carefully. Was she someone important to Mr. Archer? Mrs. Henderson's expression turned sad. Sarah was his wife. The revelation stunned Virginia. His wife? I had no idea he was married. Was, Mrs. Henderson corrected gently. She died shortly after they arrived in Promise Creek. Childbed fever, taking her and their infant son both. Virginia's heart constricted at the thought of such a devastating loss. How terrible! It changed him. He'd already seen his share of suffering in the war, from what I understand. But losing Sarah and the baby. He withdrew into himself after that, focused on building his ranch, took dangerous jobs tracking outlaws, as if he didn't much care whether he lived or died. Virginia's gaze returned to Tucker, seeing him now through new eyes. The seriousness, the reserve, the reluctance to engage in social activities all took on new meaning with this knowledge of his past. That's why everyone is so interested in his attendance tonight, Mrs. Henderson continued. It's the first sign in 5 years that he might be ready to rejoin the living. Before Virginia could respond, Tucker returned to her side, his expression troubled. Is everything all right? She asked. Tucker hesitated. The Denton gang was spotted near Willow Creek yesterday. Sheriff thinks they might be heading this way. Virginia's heart quickened. The men who robbed me, Tucker nodded grimly. The same. Sheriff's organizing a posse to ride out tomorrow, try to intercept them before they cause more trouble. And you're going with them, Virginia guessed, noting the resolve in his expression. I know these hills better than most, Tucker said simply. And I've tracked men like the Dentons before. Virginia was surprised by the surge of fear she felt at the thought of Tucker riding out to confront dangerous outlaws. Will it be dangerous? A small smile touched his lips. Worried about me, Miss Evans? Yes, she admitted without pretense. I am. Something shifted in Tucker's eyes, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. I'll be careful. The music had started again, a slower tune this time. Tucker offered his hand. Another dance before I take you home. Virginia placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her back to the dance floor. This dance was more intimate than the previous one, requiring partners to remain close, one of Tucker's hands at her waist, the other holding hers. When will you leave? Virginia asked as they moved slowly to the music. Dawn, Tucker replied. With luck, we'll catch them before they reach town. And if you do, his expression hardened, they'll face justice for their crimes. They danced in silence for a moment, Virginia acutely aware of his proximity, the strength of his hand at her waist, the faint scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Mr. Archer, she said finally, I've learned something about you tonight. His steps faltered slightly. Have you, Mrs. Henderson told me about your wife, about Sarah. Tucker's face closed like a shutter, all warmth draining from his expression. Did she? It wasn't a question, but Virginia answered anyway. Yes, I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Archer. I can't imagine the pain you've endured. Tucker was silent for several beats, his jaw working as if struggling with his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. It was a long time ago. But the heart doesn't measure grief in years, Virginia said gently. My father has been gone less than a year, and there are days when the loss still feels as fresh as the moment it happened. Tucker's gaze met hers, and in his eyes she saw a flash of raw pain before he carefully masked it again. We should go. It's getting late, and I need to prepare for tomorrow. The dance hadn't ended, but Virginia didn't protest as Tucker led her from the floor. They made their goodbyes quickly, with several townspeople expressing concern about the news of the Denton gang's proximity. The walk back to Virginia's cabin was silent, the easy companionship of earlier replaced by a tension she didn't know how to breach. Tucker's posture was rigid, his expression closed, and Virginia sensed that her mention of Sarah had erected a barrier between them. At her door, he removed his hat, his manner formal. "Thank you for accompanying me this evening, Miss Evans." "Thank you for escorting me," she replied. "And please be careful tomorrow. I would be most distressed if anything happened to you." Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary softening, but it was quickly suppressed. "Good night, Miss Evans." "Good night, Mr. Archer." As she watched him walk away, Virginia felt a profound sadness. She had glimpsed the man beneath the careful reserve tonight, had danced with him, laughed with him, felt the stirrings of something that might, given time, grow into more than friendship. And now, with a few well-intentioned words, she feared she had driven him away. Virginia slept poorly that night, her dreams troubled by images of Tucker facing dangerous outlaws, of shots fired in dusty streets, of blood staining the desert sand. She woke before dawn, her heart racing, and knew that further sleep was impossible. Rising, she lit a lamp and prepared a simple breakfast, though she had little appetite. As she sipped her tea, she watched the eastern sky gradually lighten, knowing that Tucker and the other men would be gathering now, preparing to ride out in search of the Denton gang. The thought of him facing the men who had beaten her filled her with dread. The Dentons were violent, unpredictable. They had shown no hesitation in harming a defenseless woman. What would they do when confronted by armed lawmen? Virginia dressed for the day, though it was Sunday and there would be no school. She needed occupation, something to keep her mind from dwelling on the dangers Tucker might be facing. She decided to attend the church service, then perhaps offer assistance to Mrs. Peterson at the general store. As she stepped outside, the morning air was cool and clear, the town just beginning to stir. In the distance, she could see a group of riders moving away from the sheriff's office, the posse, heading out to intercept the Denton gang. She strained her eyes, trying to identify Tucker among them, but they were too far away, already becoming indistinct as they rode toward the hills to the west. "Be safe," she whispered, the words carried away by the morning breeze. Church service was subdued that morning, with several men absent due to their participation in the posse. Reverend Miller offered prayers for their safety, and Virginia added her own silent plea for Tucker's protection. After the service, she approached Mrs. Peterson. "I was wondering if you might need help at the store today. I find I need occupation." Mrs. Peterson's kind eyes reflected understanding. "Worried about the men, are you? Tucker in particular, I'd wager." Virginia didn't deny it. "Yes. Come along then." Sunday's usually quiet, but there's inventory to be done, and that always goes faster with an extra pair of hands. The work at the store proved to be the distraction Virginia needed. Mrs. Peterson kept her busy counting stock, arranging displays, and even helping the few customers who came in. By mid-afternoon, Virginia's anxiety had receded to a manageable level. "You've been a tremendous help," Mrs. Peterson said as they shared tea in the small room behind the store. "I'd hire you permanently if you weren't already employed as our teacher." Virginia smiled. "I've enjoyed it." "Thank you for allowing me to help." Mrs. Peterson studied her over the rim of her teacup. "You care for him, don't you, Tucker?" The direct question caught Virginia off guard. I admire him greatly. He's been kind to me when I most needed kindness." "That's not what I asked, Mrs. Peterson said gently. "Tucker Archer is a good man who has known great sorrow. He deserves happiness if he'll allow himself to accept it." Before Virginia could formulate a response, The door to the store banged open, and Mr. Peterson rushed in, his expression urgent. "They're back," he announced. "The posse is returning." Virginia's heart leaped to her throat. "Is everyone all right? Is Mr. Archer?" "Tucker's fine," Mr. Peterson assured her quickly. "But there's been trouble. The Dentons put up a fight. 2 of them are dead, and Sheriff Mason took a bullet in the shoulder." Virginia gasped. "How serious is it?" "Doc Williams is tending to him now. Says he'll recover with time." Mr. Peterson turned to his wife. "They'll need supplies, bandages, alcohol, whatever we can spare for the doctor." Mrs. Peterson was already moving, gathering items from the shelves. "Of course." "Virginia, would you help me pack these?" Together, they quickly assembled the requested supplies. As they worked, Virginia asked, "What of the Denton gang? Were they all captured?" Mr. Peterson shook his head grimly. "2 dead, as I said. 1 captured the youngest brother. But their leader, Jeb Denton, escaped. Tucker and a couple of the other men are still tracking him." The news sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Virginia. Tucker was still out there, still in danger. "Here," Mrs. Peterson said, handing a basket of medical supplies to her husband. "Take these to Doc Williams right away." As Mr. Peterson hurried out, Virginia turned to Mrs. Peterson. "I should go. I need to. I need to know when Mr. Archer returns." Understanding softened the older woman's features. "Of course, dear, go on." And Virginia. She hesitated. "When a man like Tucker Archer starts to care for someone after so long alone, it's not a simple thing. Be patient with him." Virginia nodded, grateful for the advice. "I will." She left the store and made her way to the sheriff's office, where a small crowd had gathered. The captured Denton brother was being led inside, his hands manacled behind his back. He was younger than Virginia had expected, perhaps no more than 20, with a sullen expression and a bloody gash across his forehead. Deputy Wilson, now in charge with Sheriff Mason injured, acknowledged Virginia with a nod as she approached. "Miss Evans, come to see justice done." "I came to inquire about the men still tracking Jeb Denton," she replied. "When do you expect them back?" Wilson shrugged. "Hard to say. Tucker knows what he's doing, but Denton's slippery. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow." Virginia's disappointment must have shown on her face, for Wilson added, "Don't worry, miss. Tucker Archer can handle himself. Best tracker in the territory, and he's got good men with him." Virginia nodded, trying to take comfort in the deputy's confidence. "Thank you, please. When they return, would you let me know?" "Of course, Miss Evans." There was nothing to do but wait. Virginia returned to her cabin, where she tried to occupy herself with preparations for the coming school week. But her thoughts kept straying to Tucker, imagining him following the outlaw's trail through the rugged hills, perhaps facing a desperate, cornered man. The images made it impossible to concentrate. As evening fell, Virginia lit her lamps and prepared a simple supper, though she had little appetite. She was just washing her dishes when a knock came at her door. Her heart leaped with hope as she hurried to answer it, but it was Deputy Wilson who stood on her doorstep, his expression grave. "Miss Evans," he said, removing his hat. "Thought you'd want to know. Tucker and the others have returned." The relief that flooded through her was immediate. "Thank God. Is everyone all right? Did they capture Denton?" Wilson hesitated. "They didn't get Denton. Lost his trail in the hills after dark. But there's something else." The deputy's tone sent a chill through Virginia. "What is it? Is Mr. Archer hurt?" "Not exactly. But when they were tracking Denton, they found something. Something that concerns you." Virginia frowned. "Me? I don't understand." "They found your trunk, miss. The one that was on the stagecoach when you were robbed. It had been broken open, most of the contents taken, but there were some papers left behind. Letters and such with your name on them." Hope surged through Virginia. "My trunk? Where is it now?" "Tucker has it. He's at the sheriff's office, wanted me to ask if you'd come down there." Of course, Virginia said immediately. Just let me get my shawl. The walk to the sheriff's office seemed interminable, though in reality it took only a few minutes. Deputy Wilson escorted her inside, where she found Tucker standing by the desk, his clothing dust-covered and his expression weary. Beside him was a battered trunk, its lid broken and hanging askew. "Mr. Archer," Virginia said, relief evident in her voice, "you're safe." Tucker looked up, and something in his eyes softened at the sight of her. "Miss Evans, thank you for coming." Virginia approached the trunk, her heart beating faster at the sight of the familiar object. "Deputy Wilson said you found this while tracking Jeb Denton." Tucker nodded. "In a cave about 15 miles west of here. Looks like the Dentons used it as a hideout. Your trunk was there, along with other stolen goods." Virginia knelt beside the trunk, examining its damaged state. The lock had been broken, and a cursory glance inside confirmed that most of her belongings were gone: the clothing, the books, the small keepsakes she had brought from Boston. "We found these," Tucker said, handing her a bundle of papers. "Letters, mostly. And this." He held out a small, leather-bound book. Virginia recognized it immediately: her father's journal, which she had packed as a memento of him. She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. "This meant more to me than anything else in the trunk." Tucker's expression was unreadable as he watched her. "You should know. Some of your personal papers were scattered about the cave. The men may have read them." Virginia felt a flush of embarrassment at the thought of strangers poring over her private correspondence. "I see. I gathered everything I could find," Tucker continued, "but I can't guarantee we recovered it all." Virginia nodded, grateful despite the invasion of privacy. "You've done more than enough, Mr. Archer. I'm deeply thankful." An awkward silence fell between them. Tucker looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. Yet he was watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Deputy Wilson said you lost Denton's trail," Virginia said finally, breaking the silence. Tucker's expression hardened. "For now, but he can't hide forever. We'll find him eventually." "I'm just glad you returned safely," Virginia said softly. "I was concerned." Something flickered in Tucker's eyes: surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "Were you?" "Very much so," she admitted. Deputy Wilson cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "I'll just step outside for a moment," he said, a knowing look passing between him and Tucker before he exited the office. Alone now, Virginia became acutely aware of the tension between them: not the uncomfortable tension of their parting after the social, but something different, something charged with unspoken feelings. "Miss Evans," Tucker began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "Virginia, there's something I need to say." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a shiver through her. "Yes." Tucker took a step closer, his gaze intent on her face. "When I was tracking Denton, following his trail through those hills, all I could think about was getting back here, getting back to you." Virginia's breath caught in her throat. "Tucker, I know it hasn't been long," he continued, "and I know I'm not. I've been alone a long time, set in my ways, but something's changed since you arrived in Promise Creek. Since you arrived in my life." He took another step toward her, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could smell the dust and leather scent of him. "When I found your trunk, saw your things scattered by those men, read the pain in some of those letters about your father's passing, I felt such rage, such a need to protect you, to make things right for you." Tucker's voice had dropped to a near whisper. "It scared me, feeling so much after so long feeling nothing." Virginia couldn't speak, her heart too full with the words she was hearing. Tucker reached out slowly, his calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. I told myself it was too soon, that I barely know you, that I had no right to feel this way after knowing you just days. And what did your heart tell you? Virginia asked softly. A smile touched Tucker's lips, not the small, guarded smile she had seen before, but something real and warm that transformed his face. My heart told me that you set its pace from the moment I saw you. That when those men hurt you for being too slow to give them what they wanted, they had no idea they were harming someone who would come to mean so much to me. Virginia reached up, her hand covering his where it rested against her cheek. I feel it too, she whispered. This connection between us, it defies explanation or time. Tucker's gaze dropped to her lips, then returned to her eyes, seeking permission. Virginia answered by rising on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. His kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared she might break or disappear. But when Virginia's arms encircled his neck, drawing him closer, the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more passionate. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to feel this way again, he admitted. After Sarah, I thought that part of me was dead. Virginia smiled up at him. And now I find myself wondering if perhaps God gives us second chances for a reason. Tucker's expression grew serious. I can't promise it will be easy. I've been alone a long time and I carry scars that may never fully heal. As do I, Virginia replied. But perhaps together we can find a way forward that honors the past without being bound by it. Tucker nodded, a new light in his eyes. I'd like that. Very much. The sound of boots on the boardwalk outside signaled Deputy Wilson's return. Tucker stepped back slightly, though he kept hold of Virginia's hand. Wilson entered, glancing between them with a poorly concealed smile. Everything all right here? Tucker nodded. Everything's fine, Deputy. I'll be escorting Miss Evans home now. And tomorrow, I'd like to speak with the town council about raising some funds to replace what she lost in the robbery. Wilson's eyebrows rose. That's mighty generous, Tucker. It's the right thing to do, Tucker replied simply. This town wanted a teacher. The least we can do is make sure she has what she needs to start her new life here. Virginia squeezed his hand, touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you. Tucker helped her gather the recovered papers and her father's journal, then offered his arm. Shall we? The walk to Virginia's cabin was different this time. No awkward silence, no tension, just a companionable warmth and the occasional brush of their shoulders as they moved together through the quiet town. At her door, Tucker turned to face her. I meant what I said, Virginia. About having feelings for you, but I want to do this properly. Court you as you deserve to be courted. Virginia smiled up at him. I'd like that very much, Tucker. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. Then I'll call on you tomorrow evening if that's acceptable. It's more than acceptable, Virginia replied. It's eagerly anticipated. Tucker's smile, that rare, transformative smile, appeared again. Good night, Virginia. Good night, Tucker. As she watched him walk away, Virginia felt a profound sense of peace settling over her. The robbery that had seemed so devastating just days ago had led her here to Promise Creek, to a teaching position she already loved, and to a man who made her heart race with just a look. Perhaps Tucker was right. Perhaps God did give second chances for a reason. 6 months later, Virginia stood at the schoolhouse window, watching as her students filed out for the day. The summer heat was beginning to give way to cooler autumn temperatures, and the landscape around Promise Creek was taking on the golden hues of the changing season. So much had changed since her arrival in the spring. The schoolhouse now boasted new books, slates for each student, and even a small library in the corner, all made possible by the town's generosity after hearing of her losses. Her own cabin had gradually been transformed as well, with small comforts and necessities replacing what had been stolen. But the most profound change had been in her heart. What had begun as gratitude toward Tucker Archer had blossomed into deep, abiding love over the months of his courtship. He had been true to his word, courting her properly with dinner invitations, Sunday afternoon rides, and small, thoughtful gifts that showed how well he had come to know her. The town had watched their romance unfold with collective approval. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had first told Virginia about Sarah, had taken her aside after church one Sunday to say, "You've brought him back to life, my dear. We're all so grateful." Virginia was gathering her teaching materials when she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she smiled at the sight of Tucker riding toward the schoolhouse, right on time as always. He dismounted with easy grace, tying his horse to the hitching post before coming inside. In the months since their first meeting, the lines of tension had eased from his face, and he smiled more readily now. Today, he was grinning as he entered the schoolhouse. "Good afternoon, Miss Evans," he greeted her, his eyes warm with affection. "Good afternoon, Mr. Archer," she replied, matching his formal tone though her heart quickened at his presence. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Tucker crossed to her desk, leaning against it as he watched her gather her things. "I thought I might escort you home today, and perhaps discuss something of importance." Virginia looked up at him, curious. "Something of importance?" Tucker nodded, suddenly serious. "Very important, in fact." They walked together to Virginia's cabin, Tucker leading his horse behind them. The autumn afternoon was pleasantly warm, the sky a clear, endless blue above them. At her door, Tucker tied his horse to the post and turned to her. "Virginia, there's something I've been wanting to ask you for some time now." Virginia's heart began to race as Tucker reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a single diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "I sent for it from Kentucky a month ago." Virginia's eyes filled with tears as Tucker dropped to one knee before her. "Virginia Evans," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When you came to Promise Creek, I was a man half alive, going through the motions of living without truly participating in life. You changed that. You brought light back into my world, showed me that it was possible to love again, to hope again." He took her hand in his. "I love you, Virginia, with all that I am. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Virginia's tears spilled over as she nodded. "Yes, Tucker. Yes, I will marry you." Tucker's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was on his feet, gathering her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of the depth of his feelings. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory." Virginia smiled up at him. "And you've given me a home and a future I never dared hope for after the robbery." Tucker's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, I never told you this, but when I first saw you after those men had hurt you, when you were sitting there in the dust with your split lip and your defiant eyes, I thought to myself, there's a woman who sets the pace of life to her own drummer. I had no idea then that you would come to set the pace of my heart as well." Virginia's eyes filled with fresh tears at his words. "And you, Tucker Archer, gave me strength when I had lost everything. You showed me that sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of something far more beautiful than we could have imagined." They were married 2 weeks later in the Promise Creek Church, with the entire town in attendance. Virginia wore a gown of ivory satin that the women of the town had helped her sew, and Tucker wore a new black suit ordered specially from Tucson, Sheriff Mason, his arm still in a sling but healing well, gave the bride away. Mrs. Peterson wept openly throughout the ceremony, while her husband pretended the dust in the air was affecting his eyes. As they exchanged their vows, Virginia looked up into Tucker's eyes and saw their future reflected there, a future built on mutual respect, shared adversity overcome, and a love that had bloomed unexpectedly in the harsh landscape of the Arizona Territory. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Miller declared. "You may kiss your bride." Tucker didn't hesitate, drawing Virginia into his arms and kissing her to the cheers and applause of the assembled townspeople. Later, at the celebration held in the town square, Mrs. Henderson approached the newlyweds. "I believe Sarah would approve," she said softly to Tucker. "She would want you to be happy." Tucker's arm tightened around Virginia's waist. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I believe she would too." As the evening progressed, Virginia found a moment alone with her new husband. "Are you happy, Mr. Archer?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Tucker pulled her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mrs. Archer." The new name sent a thrill through Virginia. "Mrs. Archer," she repeated, savoring the sound. "I like that very much." "So do I," Tucker murmured, bending to kiss her once more. The following morning they set out for Tucker's ranch, their ranch now. As they crested the rise that offered the first view of the property, Virginia gasped in delight. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, constructed of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around it. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings, and beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "Welcome home, Virginia," Tucker said, his voice filled with pride and something like nervousness. "I hope it meets with your approval." Virginia turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's beautiful, Tucker. Absolutely beautiful." Relief washed over his face. "I've made some changes these past months. Added to the house, fixed up the garden that had gone to seed. I wanted it to be worthy of you." Virginia reached across from her horse to touch his arm. "It's perfect, but more importantly, it's ours, together." Tucker's smile was all the response she needed. Life settled into a new rhythm after their marriage. Virginia continued teaching at the Promise Creek School, riding to and from town each day on a gentle mare Tucker had given her as a wedding gift. Tucker managed the ranch, gradually expanding its operations with Virginia's support and encouragement. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked about their days, their plans, their hopes for the future. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, each drawing comfort from the other's presence. One such evening, nearly a year after their wedding, Virginia turned to Tucker with a smile that held a secret. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Tucker looked at her, raising an eyebrow in question. "What is it?" Virginia took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Come spring, there will be 3 of us living in this house." Tucker's eyes widened as understanding dawned. For a moment he seemed frozen, his hand pressed against her still flat abdomen. Then, to Virginia's surprise, tears filled his eyes. "A baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby," Virginia nodded, her own eyes growing moist at his reaction. "Yes, Tucker, we're having a baby." Tucker pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "Virginia," he murmured against her hair. "My Virginia." She felt his tears against her cheek and understood the complex emotions behind them: joy at the new life they had created together, but also remembrance of the child he had lost, the family that had been taken from him before. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Tucker drew back to look into her eyes, his face alight with wonder. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. I'm overwhelmed, grateful, terrified, overjoyed." Virginia smiled through her own tears. Me too, all of those things. Tucker placed his hand gently on her stomach once more. I promise you, both of you, that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy. Always. I know you will, Virginia replied. That's why I love you so much. The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. Tucker threw himself into readying the house for the baby, building a cradle with his own hands, and converting a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery. Virginia continued teaching as long as she was able, reluctantly taking leave only when her advancing pregnancy made the daily ride to town too uncomfortable. The women of Promise Creek rallied around her, visiting often to offer advice, assistance, and gifts for the baby. Mrs. Peterson, in particular, became a frequent visitor, bringing with her the wisdom gained from raising 5 children of her own. As her time grew near, Virginia found herself thinking often of Sarah, Tucker's first wife who had died in childbirth. Though Tucker rarely spoke of her now, Virginia knew the fear must be in his mind, the possibility of history repeating itself. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Virginia broached the subject. Tucker, I know you must be worried about the birth. He looked at her sharply, his expression confirming her suspicion. Who told you that? No one had to tell me, Virginia replied gently. I know you and I know your history. It would be strange if you weren't concerned. Tucker was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. I can't lose you, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Not you too. Virginia moved to kneel before him, taking his hands in hers. Look at me, Tucker. Reluctantly, he met her gaze. I am strong and healthy, she said firmly. Dr. Williams says everything is progressing normally. And unlike before, we have access to proper medical care. Promise Creek has grown since you first came here. Tucker nodded, though the worry remained in his eyes. I know. Logically, I know all that. But your heart is afraid, Virginia finished for him. I understand. But I need you to believe that we will come through this, you, me, and our child. I need you to have faith. Tucker drew her into his arms, holding her close. I'll try, he promised. For you, I'll try. When Virginia's labor began on a clear spring morning, Tucker's fear was evident in every line of his body. He sent a ranch hand galloping to town to fetch Dr. Williams, then hovered anxiously as Mrs. Peterson, who had arrived to help, prepared the bedroom. Tucker, Mrs. Peterson said firmly, you're not helping by pacing like a caged mountain lion. Go outside and wait for the doctor. Virginia, already breathing through the early contractions, managed a smile at Tucker's expression, a mixture of indignation and relief at being banished. Go, she told him. Mrs. Peterson knows what she's doing. I'll be fine. Reluctantly, Tucker left the room, though Virginia could hear his footsteps as he paced the hallway outside. The labor progressed steadily throughout the day. Dr. Williams arrived by mid-morning, his calm presence reassuring both Virginia and, by extension, Tucker. As the afternoon wore on and the contractions intensified, Virginia found strength in the knowledge of Tucker's love and the thought of the child they would soon hold. Just as the sun was setting, casting long golden rays through the bedroom window, Virginia gave a final push, and their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately set her father's fears to rest. A girl, Dr. Williams announced, placing the squalling infant on Virginia's chest. A healthy, beautiful girl. Virginia looked down at her daughter through tears of joy and exhaustion. The baby had a shock of dark hair, Tucker's hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, Virginia caught a glimpse of what looked to be her own green eyes. Tucker, she called, her voice weak but joyful. Come meet your daughter. The door opened immediately, as if he had been waiting with his hand on the knob. Tucker entered hesitantly, his eyes going first to Virginia's face, assuring himself that she was well, before dropping to the tiny bundle in her arms. "A daughter," he whispered, approaching the bed with reverence. "We have a daughter. Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Williams discreetly left the room, giving the new family their privacy. Tucker sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out a trembling finger to touch the baby's cheek. "She's perfect," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Just like her mother." Virginia smiled up at him, exhausted but radiantly happy. "What shall we name her?" Tucker was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving between his wife and child. "What about Elizabeth?" he suggested. "After your mother." Virginia's heart swelled with love for this man who remembered such details from their many conversations. "Elizabeth," she repeated, looking down at their daughter. "Yes, that's perfect. Elizabeth Sarah Archer." Tucker's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Sarah," Virginia nodded. "If you're comfortable with it, I thought it would be a way to honor her memory, to acknowledge that she was part of your journey to this moment." Tears filled Tucker's eyes as he leaned forward to kiss Virginia tenderly. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for understanding, for healing parts of me I thought would be broken forever." Virginia touched his cheek. "We heal each other, Tucker. That's what love does." As night fell over the Archer ranch, the new family rested together in the quiet bedroom. Elizabeth slept peacefully in a cradle beside the bed, and Tucker lay beside Virginia, his arm protectively around her. "I never thought I could be this happy again," he murmured, his voice soft in the darkness. "After losing Sarah and our son, I believed that part of my life was over forever." Virginia turned to face him, her hand resting over his heart. "And now," Tucker smiled, and even in the dim light, she could see the peace that had settled in his eyes. "Now I understand that life can bring joy after sorrow, light after darkness, that love can bloom more than once in a lifetime." "She was beaten for being too slow," he added, his voice taking on a note of wonder, "and yet she set the pace of my heart from that very first moment." Virginia rose on her elbow to kiss him softly. "And you, Thomas Archer, gave me a reason to believe in new beginnings when I had lost everything I thought mattered." Tucker pulled her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. "Not everything," he corrected gently. "You never lost your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. Those were what drew me to you, what made me fall in love with you." Virginia settled against him, contentment washing over her. "Promise Creek," she mused. "The name suits this place, doesn't it? It's where promises are made and kept. And where second chances are given," Tucker added. "To schoolteachers and lonely ranchers alike." As they drifted toward sleep, the sound of their daughter's soft breathing a gentle counterpoint to the night sounds outside, Virginia thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the refined drawing rooms of Boston to the wild beauty of the Arizona Territory, from the devastation of the robbery to the joy of finding love with Tucker. Life had not unfolded as she had planned, but as she lay in her husband's arms with their daughter sleeping peacefully beside them, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that it had unfolded exactly as it should.